Welcome, everybody, to the March 2026 edition of Solar Currents. My name is Robert Pacitti. I'm the Grand Pendragon of AODA, and this is a service put on by the Ancient Order of Druids in America. You can find more information about the Ancient Order of Druids America at aoda.org. So, we have included a glyph chart here for all those people that are attending the live recording. Dana will share that in the chat. This will just tell us exactly what we're looking at when we're looking at the charts, and will help you kind of disseminate some of the information that you're looking at when you're looking at your own. So we have the zodiac symbols. The red represents the fire signs. The yellow are the air signs. The green are the earth signs, and the blue are the water signs. Then we have our planetary glyphs. These are essentially the actors that are moving around the zodiac. You can take a look, and when we talk about the planets, I'll make sure that I point them out on the chart so that you can make the association. And then we also have the aspects, and this is really the relationships between the planetary bodies. So this really does kind of tell you kind of the nature of their orientation and how they will interact with one another. And as far as the planets, I mean, we're going to be talking about the sun and the moon. These are our luminaries. These shine light. The sun is kind of how we approach the day-to-day world, our purpose, and it shines light on our outer world, whereas the moon is our inner realm. It's our dreams. It's our subconscious. And then we get to the personal planets. We have Mercury. Mercury is all about our communication. It's how we learn. It's how we conduct business. Then we have Venus. That is our values and what we're attracted to. It's how we give love and how we receive love. And then we also have Mars. Mars is more of the primal energy. It's how we fight and how we fawn. Then we get into the social planets. We have Jupiter. Jupiter is all about our ability to expand and our ability to find meaning and how we do that. Saturn is about our limitations. It can be our complexes, our restrictions, but it's also our maturation process. It's very important. And then we have the transpersonal planets, which we would also call the outer planets. We have Uranus, which is really about our voyage of authenticity. Neptune, which is our enchantment, but can also be kind of our delusions and our illusions. And then we have Pluto, which is the process of death and rebirth in our lives. It really can bring power and intensity to the forefront. Now, we've been talking about the minor grand trine between these outer planets for the past, since we started this, and it's really going to continue to be a theme. We talked about the analogy of the puzzle box last month, and how over time, these planets they've been either out of sign or they've been retrograde. But as we get into April, May, June, and July, we're going to start to see everything tighten up and see the true meaning that we're going to be disseminating through this marriage of the outer planets. So, when we're talking about the transpersonal planets, we're talking about things that affect the collective. While they still have meanings into our individual charts, they tend to more represent what is going on for everyone. So these guys continue their alliance, weaving a lot of change into the collective story right now. Pluto is in Aquarius. That is going to be a rebirth in how we view humanism, technology, and the empowerment of the rebel. Neptune in Aries, it does kind of lay a fog of war, but also initiation. All of these planets have multivalent ways that they can express themselves within a sign. And it's important to, not one planet does one thing. This will be a time of initiation, urgency, and we do have this kind of conflict of spiritual authority going on right now, spiritual with quotes around it, really against the weight of tradition and the way that we've done things. A very good teacher of astrology just said, this is going to be a time when the old symbols will not work for the new meanings. We're going to be passing through this gateway of consciousness, and things are going to have to be broken down for that consciousness to emerge. And then we're going to have Uranus moving into Gemini, and that's going to happen on April 26th. That is really going to be kind of a striking of kind of chaos, but authenticity as well, within our networks of communication, how we exchange knowledge, and the very fabric of the written word. And we're seeing kind of, how these are manifesting through what's going on just in the current events right now. And like I said, the Uranus moving into Gemini is kind of the last piece of the lockbox that we need, that puzzle box, to see exactly what the meaning and the message is going to be. Right now, Uranus is in Taurus. Okay. So it's not really in the same polarity that Pluto and Neptune are. Pluto is in an air sign, Neptune is in a fire sign. Those are what we would traditionally call the masculine signs. Whereas Taurus is an earth sign, it's considered a more feminine sign traditionally. Now, when it moves into Gemini, it is going to match the polarity, and therefore we will not have anything left that is kind of preventing these planets from working together in their smoothest form. And then what's going to happen is that orb is going to tighten up. The orb is the distance between the planets. That is going to tighten up over May, June, and July into something where we're only going to see them about a degree away from each other. So that will be really the time when we see that energy really kind of come into focus. So we talked about how this is going to affect you. What is your role in this story that's going out within the collective? And right now we're talking about, the first few degrees of each and every sign, because that's really where those planets are resonating. So if you are somebody who has, strong placements in the beginning of Libra, Sun, Moon, Ascendant, even personal planets, social planets, any planet is really affected by it. But it's through the luminaries and through the Ascendant in which we really see the strongest expression, because it's going to be directly affecting our inner and our outer worlds. So Libra is really the opposite of it. But it creates what's called the kite pattern. This is what is really needed to overcome the tension. And it really makes sense that Libra, which is about relationships, justice, balance, communication, is going to be something that we really need to, bring these planets into their, probably their most helpful or their most positive, version of themselves. So, that is something to think about if you have Libra placements. Also, another thing to consider with Libra is that anytime that there's an interaction between Saturn and Libra, we're going to see themes of justice. We see the scales of justice appear when we have those strong Libra placements. There are also two Yod patterns. You'll see them in the green circles. Those are called the finger of God patterns. They kind of they create what's called a fated choice or a fated challenge. This is usually where, the result of these planets working together is that we're going to need to make some kind of big decision. And that is with our Scorpios and our Virgos. Okay. And then we get to our Sagittarius and our Leos. They kind of contain the energy. It's called a basket pattern. They represent the people that are really holding the space for what's happening right now. So you would always look at the planet that is opposite them to see what kind of energy they're dealing with, and that needs to be integrated. For those that have Sagittarius, strong Sagittarius placements, we're going to be confronting authenticity. That is really going to be your archetypal role in this. While Leo is opposite Pluto and has to confront power dynamics and power structures. Then we have, where we are at the squares for these, which is our Cancers and our Capricorns. This is an energy where there's going to be a little bit of friction. Even though each one of them is really comfortable, with at least one of the planets there. Capricorn is certainly comfortable with Saturn. And Cancer is I would say well attuned to the Neptunian energy. It can do well there. It's that opposite planet that really brings kind of the confrontation there to light. So for the Capricorns, it's like they don't really want that dissolving energy that Neptune comes. And once their structures are built and once their systems are set, they do not want the storm coming through and knocking everything over. They rely on their structures, and that's important. Now, the same thing with Cancer is, they don't want to deal with the Saturnian Aries energy that can be way aggressive about setting restrictions and for setting rules. They're the Cancers are more looking for a holistic emotional family unit, where friends and family are the most important thing. It lives in the emotional realm, and it wants to kind of be in that emotional realm, and it does not want to deal with the aggressiveness. Um, and then we get to the people who have the Taurus, the Taurus Gemini, and also the Aquarius placements. You're directly on one of these outer planets. So Aquarius it's all about kind of like having to deal with a complete rebirth of humanism right now. That might be something that you can attune to, but at the same time, it's still challenging. The same thing with Uranus moving into Gemini. That's a really kind of compatible energy for Gemini. Gemini likes to be an explorer, and Uranus tends to shake things up. It's really how it all works within the collective, though. And then we have the people with the semi sextile placements, which is going to be our the Tauruses and the Pisces. And this is just kind of a difficult energy for them. They really can't see what's going on too much. Taurus really trusts in nature and the natural process, and big upheavals happen a little too fast for them. And with Pisces, the same thing. They like to be in the realm where things are creative and where spirit is happening. And when we get all of this kind of heaviness onto the situation, it can bring them to very interesting places. Um, and then obviously we have our people who are the Aries placements, and you are right on that conjunction. So the Aries are really kind of dealing with that kind of concept of having to be courageous in times when the structures around us are being dissolved. So that is just, and the reason why I like to go over that is because it tells you that, when these big patterns happen, especially with the outer planets, every sign is affected. No one is spared from any of this. There's no one that's just going to be walking around whistling saying, this is just peachy keen. There are going to be positive and negative qualities that are going to be pulled out of each and every sign as we move through all of this collective change. So where are we at in the wheel of the year? We're getting very close to the spring equinox. So this is really the end of the winter quadrant in the zodiac. We are quickly approaching March 20th, which will be the spring equinox. As we see, the fire festivals are at the 15 degree of the fixed signs, which means they are the middle of the season. So we moved from Imbolc, and now we're moving into the spring equinox. The interesting thing about the spring equinox is that it is the beginning of Aries, but it's also the beginning of the natural zodiac. Aries is considered the first sign, so this is really a new beginning. And I understand we have for some people consider Samhain the beginning of the new year. Some just go with the calendar with January 1st. I mean, for me and from an astrological standpoint, the spring equinox is the beginning of the new year. So we just had a lunar eclipse. We went really in depth to the solar eclipse, and we're not going to spend as much time on that today. But I did want to show you a graphic of what is actually happening during a lunar eclipse. So during the solar eclipse, the moon was between the Earth and the sun, and it was, kind of shading that light from reaching the Earth. Well, this is another situation where the luminary is completely shrouded, but this time it's by Earth itself. The moon moves on an elliptical path. So when we're seeing a full moon, we're still seeing the full resonance of the sun being reflected. But it's when it's in that perfect position where the earth really kind of blocks the light of the sun is when we get these lunar eclipses. And there are two a year. So we eclipses, they're magical, especially when they're in totality, and we can really experience it from a sensual standpoint. But there are two solar eclipses a year, and there are two lunar eclipses a year, and they're usually about 6 months apart. So I want to talk about this Virgo lunar eclipse because I think it's so important to the story of the month and what is actually going to be happening. It did happen on the 3rd. Today's the 5th. So in a Virgo lunar eclipse, where Virgo is, that's the sign that the moon was in when the eclipse happened. Its opposition, a lunar eclipse is always what we would consider a full moon. So that means the sun is always directly opposite. What is the direct opposite of where we're at right now with the sun in Pisces? It's Virgo. So we can really just, think in terms of oppositions of signs to figure this out as well. But really the question, or at least one of the questions, becomes, are we over prioritizing productivity, daily responsibilities, and the discernment of the mundane at the expense of our creativity and spiritual growth? Are the things that we have to kind of do on a rigid basis through life, the things we have to organize and manage, has it become overwhelming to the point where we've completely shut off our creativity and our ability to grow into spirit? And it's something to really contemplate. I've struggled with that lately with some of the things happening in the collective. How do we make that manifest? So let's just understand kind of the energy of a lunar eclipse. The moon is our archetypal protector. That's its role. And that has both physical and spiritual ramifications, because one of the roles of the moon is to kind of absorb some of the things that are going to hit the earth. The moon was originally called Theia. It was, essentially a sister planet that crashed into the Earth, and then in the process of reformation came out and became this orbiting body. It is our archetypal protector. She balances and processes the celestial or solar currents and the telluric currents into a holistic inner realm experience. That is the role of the moon in our lives. It's taking the things from above, like, things like time and fate and thought and spirit, and it's merging it with the telluric energies, nourishment of the body, the actual feeling of the earth, and brings it into one holistic inner realm experience. And what it does is it really protects us for the future experiences that we're going to have. The moon is very much usually equated with the past, whereas the sun is kind of the now and the day-to-day beat. The moon is us and our ability to process the past and move forward. She rules our emotions, our subconscious, dreams, our body in terms of, being in that role of the mediator between the solar and the telluric currents, and also our cycles in life. During a lunar eclipse, that natural cycle is broken. The full moon should be reflecting the light of the sun. That is the expectation, but it's not. It's draped in shadow. We get back to our Hermetic principles: as above, so below. This is the moon is working with the shadow. Now we work with the shadow of the inner realm. And this energy is going to remain resonant until the next lunar eclipse. That is August 27th, 28th, around midnight in Pisces. So unlike other what we would call lunations, a full moon or a new moon is usually called a lunation. Where we move from a new moon, we have kind of this voyage that builds up and then recedes. This really is, the eclipses are really their own energy, and they have a much longer shelf life. So this theme is going to be with us, this kind of, are we over prioritizing productivity, daily responsibilities, and the discernment of the mundane at the expense of our creativity and spiritual growth? This is really going to be a question. What happens in August? Well, it flips. The sun will be in Virgo. The lunar eclipse will be in Pisces. So we're going to get to see the development of this, and then change and ask the question in the inverse. So very interesting thing. And this really sets off the entire month of March as far as the astrological story. So I want to get to the 7th because this, we start getting into this heavy Pisces energy. There is what's called a Mercury cazimi on the 7th. That would be Saturday. It's a moment when Mercury is in the exact heart of the sun. And this is really like a portal for mental clarity and insight in the energy of the planet. Now, what about this is interesting is Mercury's not would not be traditionally considered effective in the sign of Pisces. It's in detriment. And that could be interesting. It's in detriment, it's retrograde, it's going to be in cazimi, but keep in mind when a planet is this close to the sun, the cazimi is really considered the only part that could be considered, I don't know, good about being that close to the sun. And this is only when it's between 0 minutes and 17 minutes away from that heart of the sun. When it's between 17 minutes and 8 degrees 30 minutes, it's considered to be combust. It does not work as effectively when it's combust. This is kind of when what we would traditionally consider the ego, not in the modern sense of a negative trait, but the ego in the sense of, how we consider our self-worth within the collective, um, takes over and really kind of brings the energy of that planet down. And then from 8 minutes or I'm sorry, 8 degrees 30 minutes to 17 degrees is considered under the beams, which is just a lesser kind of version of combust. So under the beams combust, it's kind of in this place where it's not working as effectively because the sun is really literally outshining it. But in this cazimi space of 0 degrees to 0 degrees 17 minutes, this is really considered a portal where we can really get into the energy of the planet, and that energy is Pisces. Now, I would normally do like what does this mean for every sign? But Pisces is unique in that it really does affect every sign. Some astrologers, some very good astrologers, have said that Pisces is kind of the combination of all planets. I like to think of it as the Carriagewin's cauldron. There's all of this materia kind of swirling and moving around. It's like looking up at an impressionistic painting close up. We see all of these disparate parts, but it is not yet formed into something yet. And that is really the energy of Pisces. It's pre-verbal. It's the sensation of spirituality. It is not necessarily what we do with the spirit. And that really has to do with its rulership as well. Traditionally, Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. Sagittarius is also ruled by Jupiter traditionally. So when we're talking about Jupiter, we're talking about that finding meaning, the expansion. Pisces is what we would consider kind of the nocturnal form of Jupiter's expression, which is that pre-verbal kind of in Carriagewin's cauldron. We all had those moments as kids where we took a bunch of herbs from the garden and put them into a little thing of water, and we wanted to make a potion. Well, that moment before we really, we tasted it, and we're usually disappointed. There was that moment of possibility and boundary this, and there was a magic to that moment. And that is where Pisces really does exist. Whereas in Jupiter's rulership of Sagittarius, we see things more like religiosity, philosophy, the application of it into the world. So Pisces is the soup of the cosmos. It is the pre-verbal spirit. It is just a sensation. Words cannot be put to it. And it is also considered the traditional ruler of the 12th house. The 12th house is all about things that are hidden, things that are forgotten about, things that have yet to kind of, come into formation. It's also the collective unconscious. So all of these things really come into play when we're talking about Pisces, as they affect every sign. And it can be a time when things are hazy, foggy, and confusing. And Mercury being in Pisces, which is in detriment, it's also in retrograde and in this kind of under the beams combust period going up to the cazimi. Very confusing communication right now. Hard to kind of latch ourselves onto clear thoughts. But Mercury can handle it. Mercury is genderless. Mercury it can be anything that it needs to be. It can be it can be male. It can be female. It's trans. It is extraordinarily immutable. And we all have that real ability to communicate in different ways and to learn in different ways. And using Mercury is the way to do it. When we're talking about, this specific, Kazemi pattern, what it is, it's about getting to the core of our spirituality and to our creativity. You know, things that don't require words to explain, things that we can latch onto purely from a spiritual standpoint. That is the energy of the Mercury Kazemi in Pisces, and that will be available from 3:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. on the 7th. So if that isn't within the period that you get up in the morning, maybe just spending a few minutes in meditation, just allowing yourself to connect to spirit, allowing yourself to connect to your creativity, because that's going to be a powerful time to do so. So we also have Mercury is moving into Aries at this point, or I'm sorry, Venus is moving into Aries at this point, and conjunct the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that we were talking about. So this is like, you know, we want to kind of go out and, get the things that we desire. It's very warrior-like, but we're kind of chasing this dream of connection that has to discern between what is real and what is false right now. So we're a little bit stymied in how we approach that. Now, Venus in Aries is in its detriment. It's, Venus much prefers a partnership, a collaboration, a balanced approach, whereas Aries is just kind of like, I want this and I want this now. Um, and that is really the nature of it. And so it's kind of like, you know, you're it's the warrior that's looking at the two giants having the battle. Like, I'm ready to get in on this. Okay. You want to kind of separate yourself from it. You want to have your own values. You want to have your own connections. And there's a lot of forces that are competing for our attention right now. It's really about taking that concept of, independence in our values, independence in our connections, independence in how we love, and separating it from the things that are going on within the collective. So we talked about, Jupiter being the ruler of Pisces, but another thing that's happening is on the 11th, it goes direct. It's been in retrograde for quite a while. So this is what we would consider the exaltation of Jupiter. It's not in domicile. It's not in it, it's not in the place that it likes it, where it feels most natural, but it's in a place where it's highly regarded. We're talked about Jupiter and the idea of meaning and expansiveness. Cancer is really about nurturing. It's about the home. It's about our family units. It's about our tribe. It's about the shell that we put around ourselves, where we let certain people in, but we keep certain people out. Um, so when Jupiter goes direct in Cancer, we're really going to get kind of this push towards the expansive emotional abundance that you can receive from being nurtured by the tribe. This is, and that is really important. It's an idea that, abundance doesn't always come from physical things, and it can really come from that kind of emotional nurturing. And when Jupiter is in Cancer, it really is about that a big idea of the emotional abundance that we receive nurturing us by our tribe and our family. So, I want to talk a little bit about this because this is important, and this is really something that you can all do with your charts right now that I think will be a good step for even beginners. There are really four major, rulerships and ways that they express themselves. There's others when you get into traditional astrology, but these are really the big ones that we use. They're called ruler, exaltation, detriment, and fall. If you want to learn astrology, it's a good idea to kind of learn what planet rules what sign, because you start to see how those expressions really manifest. So a ruler, when it's in its rulership, the planet is able to express itself most naturally in the sign. When it's an exaltation, it's considered the honored guest. The easiest way to describe this is, think back to when you had a friend over that your parents really liked when you were a kid, and the difference between how they treated you and how they treated them. You're the kid that lives in the house. it knows how to operate with you, but it's really going to dote on that kid and maybe put on a little bit of airs for that kid that it's welcoming into the house that it really likes, maybe their friend's kid. It's an honored guest there. Many astrological magicians would consider the exaltation to be actually a better placement for a planet than the domicile. Um, excuse me, because it does do that doting. Now, detriment is when essentially a planet has trouble expressing itself naturally in the sign. And that is always going to be in the sign opposite of its domicile. Fall is, kind of analogous to the exaltation. This is the honored guest. This is the unwelcome guest. This is the kid that you brought home to play that mom didn't like, or your parents didn't like. That's how they treat them. It's like, I just really want you to move on. You're here, but let's keep it moving. So those are really the very, very basic general energy of those. Now, what you want to do is look at your chart and you want to look at your ascendant. What sign is your ascendant in? Okay. So then what you're going to do is you're just going to go through this list here. Okay. The second column where it says rules. Find your sign and then find the planet that is where it says the body in the first column. So if you're a Leo, the ruler is the sun. If you're Cancer, it's the moon. If you're a Gemini or a Virgo, it's Mercury. If you're a Taurus or a Libra, it's Venus. If you're an Aries, it's Mars. If you're a Sagittarius or a Pisces, it's traditionally Jupiter. If you're a Capricorn, it's going to be Saturn. If you're an Aquarius, it's also Saturn. And then Pisces would be Jupiter, and Scorpio would be Mars. Now you're like, why does it say something else in that first column? Because these are what we would consider modern rulerships. These planets weren't around when the rulerships were assigned. So we go with what's called the traditional rulership. And for Aquarius, that would be Uranus. For Pisces, it would be Neptune. And Scorpio, it will be Pluto. We call these the transcendent planets. Now, you also want to look at them in your chart, but I really do think that you should start off with the traditional rulership planet because it really does express it in the most obvious ways. Whereas we start getting into transcendental thoughts and more heavier, deeper concepts when we talk about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So I looked at my chart. I saw that, let's say I'm a Sagittarius rising, and I see that the ruler of my chart is Jupiter. That is what it's called. The ruler of your ascendant sign is called the ruler of your chart. You want to look at where that planet is in the zodiac signs, which house it's in, any aspects that it has to it. And that will usually be a way that a planet expresses itself out into the collective. The ascendant we want to kind of think of as the helm of the ship. It's really kind of the way that we kind of move through the collective. It could also be considered our archetypal assignment within the collective. It's very much to do with kind of how we carry ourselves, our personality, and our kind of instincts and the way that we kind of react. So just to give you some examples of how this really can work, here's a good example of a Scorpio rising. This is River Phoenix. River Phoenix was an actor in the 80s. He was considered, kind of very promising. He was, getting nominated for Academy Awards, but he ended up, dying of a drug overdose at the Viper Pit, or the Viper Room. I'm sorry, the Viper Pit was Full House, and he was a very transformational character in the zeitgeist. Now he is a Scorpio rising, and his traditional ruler is Mars. Now the thing about celebrities, and when you start looking at people's charts, that's usually the first place we go because we all have an idea of who they are. They're good to use for example charts, but we're not really seeing the deep down version of who these people are. We're seeing a curated copy of who they are. It's usually when we look at the 10th house, we see where this kind of this activity can be. So this is River Phoenix, Scorpio rising. The ruler of the chart is Mars. Where is in the Mars? Mars is in Leo in the 10th house. The 10th house is about our career, our vocation, our kind of our reputation. It's in Leo. It's a very outward sign. Okay. So we could see where kind of the, his roles were usually kind of that, that transformer. As far as I want to go is to say the bad boy. But they were all Scorpios are watchers, they're sorcerers, they're they're very silent, and they're always watching and paying attention. They tend to be the ones hiding in the shadows, paying attention to what's going on. They're very much equated with the spy. Um, and that is its really relation to Mars, where, Mars in its diurnal expression is Aries, where it's the warrior. In its nocturnal expression, it is Scorpio, the spy or the intelligence. So we can see that this is somebody who kind of brought that smoldering Scorpio quality, the way they carry. Look at the picture, to an outward expression through their 10th house, through their planetary rulership. Now we could look at somebody else who has very similar placements. Martha Stewart, also a Scorpio rising. Okay. Very different energy, though. Where is the ruler of her chart? The ruler of her chart is Mars as well, Scorpio. It's in the 5th house. The 5th house is about pleasures. It's about creativity and the things that we enjoy. It can also be it's also considered a relationship house. It's our hookups. It's our kind of trysts. It's our quick relationships. And she really was focused on that whole concept of bringing pleasure. But what's going on in her outward expression? The way that we see her, we see she's got a Venus in Virgo. Venus in Virgo is all about kind of that matriarchal figure that likes everything to be perfect, likes things to be, well adorned. Everything should be in its place. It's very beautiful because it is very it is trying to near perfection. And you can see that intensity in her personality. And you will also see intensity really as a tribute to Scorpio risings. I mean, also concepts of death and rebirth in their lives doesn't necessarily mean physical death, but I mean, she went to jail for insider trading. Um, you know, she was very popular there. She was using like, the ingredients that they could, smuggle in to make delicious treats for the rest of the inmates. I mean, it's just a very fascinating story. And just as an aside and a personal note, the fact that after what we've seen going on over the past several years, the fact that she went to jail is absolutely ridiculous in my opinion. But this is two ways that Scorpio rising can really present itself, and you can find the indication of how it will manifest within the ruler of your chart. That is just a 101 look at that. Now, then we get into this really powerful period. We talked about the Jupiter going direct. We already have the question. The question came from Virgo. The question was, are we putting too much into our mundane lives and ignoring our creative spirit? Jupiter now opens the heart. That is a big deal, okay? Because now we're like, I don't just want to connect to spirit. I want to connect to other people and share spirit. I want to share spirit with people that I care about. I want to get back to the tribe. And then we have the Mars conjuncts the North Node on the 13th, again in Pisces. Liz Green, who is kind of the astrologer that I feel like I've learned the most from, it's really a time when there is a call to be decisive about. Spiritual courage to attain our destiny. So, we have this call. We've opened our heart to others, and now we're confronting the courage to kind of go for it. Really, we need to make the decision that this is the process that we want to be a part of. And then Mercury conjuncts Mars again on the 15th. All right. This is an action of deep contemplation into the spirit. It's pre-verbal. Again, we're talking about all this Pisces energy. It does not have words. It is a sensation. It is a deep dive into the spirit. And then we have the new moon that comes up in Pisces on the 19th. This is an inner initiation into a new beginning. Now, keep in mind, this is the first lunation after that eclipse. So this really does start a new moon cycle in the overall pattern as well. And this again, it's about an initiation of a journey of spirit connecting to the subconscious, connecting to our cycles, connecting to our body, and moving forward. And the body is important because that is where we really end up. Then the sun ingresses into Aries the next day. All right. And this is now our outer initiation. We've had our lunar initiation, new moon in Pisces. Now the sun is starting a whole new cycle. Aries is very much equated with initiation. This is kind of us meeting the world, coming together and saying, hey, I'm ready to kind of step out. All right. And at the same time, Mercury goes direct and it goes out of combustion. So we are able to kind of wrap our heads around our spiritual clarity and all of the things that we have been sensing. So this within itself, this kind of period from the third, which was the sorry, the lunar eclipse all the way through here is really in itself a magical operation of, again, opening our hearts. That's key. You got to want to do it though. Um, Having the spiritual courage to say, I'm ready to go on this voyage of spirit. The action of deep contemplation into that spirit, and in an inner initiation at the new moon into our spirit and our creativity, an outer initiation into a new beginning. The work, nature is ready to start a new cycle, and so are we. And at that same time, we're kind of able to communicate the spiritual clarity. So when we're talking about archetypes that we might want to connect to through this process, it's the artist, it's the empath, it's the alchemist. And it's the alchemist not so much in the scientific sense, but the spiritual sense. It's the spiritual alchemist. It's the ability to kind of go back into that carriage wind's cauldron, like we talked about, and make our own kind of brew of Awen and work it and churn it. It's pre-verbal, it's creative, it's intuitive, and it is able to connect to the collective unconscious. And then we have also the warrior. I mean, there is courage within the warrior. It is the first crocus that pops out of the snow in the beginning of the year. So, there is this motion and this magic and this spiritual alchemy that is happening all this month under the auspice of what we discussed with Venus moving into Aries, where we are kind of that warrior right now facing these two Goliaths that are trying to fight for our attention. Venus and Aries want us to be a little bit more selfish with our connections, with our values, with our aesthetics, with how we really enjoy our space. And that is going to be the challenge. And Pisces is the avenue in which we are going to attain it. So then we get to the end of the month. We have not talked about this planetary body yet, but it's a very important one, and it's called Chiron. Chiron is a centaur. It was the first centaur. Chiron was one of the bastard children of Zeus and a nymph. You know, it came out with there was a whole human body, but the whole back end was a horse. So he was not a traditional centaur in the manner that he had the lower half of a horse and the body of a human. It was really kind of the concept of burden, where he had the full human body, but he had to drag around the butt of a horse for his entire life. He was very awkward. He was always sickly and injured, and he was eventually poisoned and had to die. But in the process, he was the one who trained all of Apollo's, warriors and all of Apollo's heroes. He taught one thing to think about. This is really equated to the wounded healer. It is the wound that we carry through us that we're also able to heal with. And that, where is the logic there? Well, when we carry a deep wound, we learn these kind of, these coping mechanisms and these self-care ideas, and we have wisdom in these wounds that we carry. And we're able to help others through that wisdom who are sharing the same problem. So, when Venus conjuncts it, in that Aries, it initiates a powerful, vulnerable, and courageous healing process for deep-seated wounds related to our self-worth, our identity, and our personal sovereignty. And that really is, one of the ways that Aries Chiron operates. It's all about wounds of our self-worth, not feeling like we're good enough, not feeling like we have worth within the collective, our identity, not being accepted for who we are and how we want to express ourselves. Very key when we're talking about a Venus conjunction, and our personal sovereignty. Like I am a sovereign being and I have the right to exist. So we really deal with that. And then that is something that eventually moves a couple days later on the 30th at the very end of the month, a Venus ingress into Taurus, which is about embodiment. It's Venus is loves being in Taurus. It's domicile in Taurus. This is really where we are able to connect all of those things to the earth, get grounded, love our bodies, love sensual pleasures. So this whole journey is about really, again, that carriage wind's cauldron of the spirit of Pisces churning and moving into our own ability to do some healing and to get into a sense of personal embodiment while we have to be this warrior that is looking at these two Goliaths, Saturn and Neptune, which are having this battle in front of us. So the moon veiled in the shadow of an eclipse poses a question. Are we over prioritizing productivity, daily obligation, and the constant discernment of the mundane at the expense of our creativity and spiritual growth? We're then drawn into that cauldron of carriage wind, a place of transformation where all things are broken down and remade. Think of the water like a Piscean potion. It's not yet fully formed yet. It's still just in that materia phase. Every ingredient is present, but it has not fused yet into something more powerful. Each element moves into the mixture, waiting for the moment when its purpose will emerge. All right. One ingredient, that Jupiter in Cancer, will open the heart. Another grants the courage to answer the call of destiny. That is the Mars conjunct the North Node. So the cauldron turns and churns, and with it, we are invited into contemplation of our connection to spirit, our creativity, and to a world that exists beyond boundaries and rigid structures. We really are confronting the Goliaths. Then comes our initiation, first with the inner world, then stirring that awareness and transformation beneath the surface. From there it moves outward with the spring equinox, shaping the external world in response to what has shifted inside. So as this unfolds, this influence of Chiron comes in, this wounded healer comes in, meeting Venus, and it marks a moment where we have to do some courageous healing. We're called to kind of confront how we feel about our self-worth within the collective, how we feel about our identity, our personal sovereignty, and we have to look honestly at the places where those wounds and our values intersect and kind of really claim our self-worth and make our intention known. And then finally, at the end of the month, we arrive into this grounded embodiment of Taurus, where insight now can become kind of a lived sensual experience. It's moved past the spirit phrase. It is now embodied. What began as that kind of swirling, uncertain mixture, it settles into form, and then the spirit returns to the body. Creativity will find its tangible expression, and the lessons of the inner journey root themselves in the physical world. So this is what is happening over the course of the month. These are the dates. I figured giving astrology charts would not be very helpful for everybody who's new. But this is really what's going to be happening over the course of the month. So Dana.